Everyone, welcome to the Carolinas Weather Group. Welcome to the Wednesday, November 11th
Oh,
edition, a day ahead of time. Well, it's Veterans Day, so before we say anything else, we want to thank all of those who have served in the military, past or present, or in the future. We thank you for your service, and we hope that you've had a good day. Yeah, we're talking about the Mesonet program tonight, and it's kind of been an active day for those guys out in Oklahoma and Kansas. They've had a cold front move through with some gusty winds, and it's a pretty neat program that we hope to share with you tonight and talk to you about the benefits of that. We don't really have one here in the Southeast, so maybe after watching this, we can maybe start some wheels going and see what we could do here in the Carolinas. So weather-wise, it's actually the sun's come out. That's good. After 16 straight days of clouds and rain and drizzle and fog, the sun came out yesterday, and it was out all day today. Tomorrow, a cold front moves through, and it's going to get really chilly throughout the entire Carolina region. Up where Ricky's at, there's a possibility of seeing a couple of flurries flying in some of his community, so I'll let him talk a little bit about that and what's going on in eastern Tennessee and southwest Virginia tonight.
I'm accounting that on the models to just model error right now. I'm not sold on that. Now, West Virginia, I'll say there's gonna be some northwest flow snow up there, but I'm not sure about the northwest flow snow in our area yet. Although we did ask all of our anchors and Mets and sports reporters to guess when the first 1 inch of snow would fall at the Tri-Cities Airport, and one of our anchors, P.J. Johnson, picked Friday. So we're pretty sure that's not going to happen. But we let them have it anyway, and we've been making fun of them for it. But it's been a pretty quiet few days here in the Tri-Cities. All the cold air, or I should say the clouds, which are to the east, that cold front pushes through early tomorrow morning, giving us some gusty showers. But that's about it. Not too much going on. A cold weekend, though, is coming up, Scotty.
Yeah, we'll blame Panovich because he's the one that threw that out there. So, anyways, here in the Carolinas, Western Carolinas down to the Charlotte metro area, we are going to see that cold front move through. It's still going to be warm tomorrow, but Friday, Saturday, Sunday, temps only going to be in the 50s and lows in the 30s. And I think we'll finally get that frost and freeze in the Charlotte metro area Sunday into Monday, as it looks like temps are going to be in the upper 20s. Oh, Kit's back, so I'll let him finish talking about what's going on in his area.
Well, we've had high pressure move in, and that's been it. I was looking at most of the stuff that was going on in Iowa today. There just wasn't anything going on here, except for we had a really nice sunset. If you go on my Twitter, at Kit Cloninger, I don't know why it's not changed on here. I tried to change it, but it's just my name right here. I put a tweet out earlier of it, and we had a really nice sunset at UNC Charlotte. Had just some low-level clouds off on the horizon, but I was following some tornado warnings and stuff with that whole low-pressure system up in the upper Midwest, and that's been pretty much the only weather that I've been watching today. Scotty?
Sorry, yeah, I should unmute the mic. Yeah, it's been an active day out in Iowa and places like that, so our thoughts, I think there was a few tornadoes. I haven't been following it too close today, but I did hear a few tornadoes did touch down in the Iowa Des Moines area. So our prayers and thoughts are with those guys. And tonight, talking of tornadoes, that's one thing that these guys kind of cover out in the field, the Mesonet program. And I'm going to let Mr. Ricky Matthews conduct the interview tonight because he actually studied for this show. And he's got a good list of questions. So, Ricky, I'm going to hand it off to you, man.
I just had a little extra time, so I thought of some questions ahead of time this time instead of, on the fly like most meteorologists seem to do. But we welcome both Chip and Chris tonight to our program. Oops, I was repeating. I opened up YouTube by accident, just like Chip did. Now it was repeating on me. To talk a little bit about the Mesonet programs in their state and kind of just how they got involved in it and really the advantages that can come from such a system. So, Chip, we'll give it to you first. You're with the Kansas Mesonet. Talk a little bit about how you got involved with this whole, technology network and what some of the advantages are of it.
Well, I got involved coming from grad school. I graduated, and the hiring freeze is on at the Weather Service, and I was just kind of looking for a job, really, anything. I was starting to resort to broadcasting. It wasn't a pretty sight. They were going to tell me to cut my hair. But no, so I had never really considered working on weather stations before, ever. And Kansas decided to give me a shot at what they were doing. It was a brand new position that opened up to manage the network, which had formerly been managed by the state climate office and the state climatologist, and they were getting overloaded just because we had so many stations. So I got involved with them, I think, in 2013, the late 2013, and basically kind of started to overhaul and to bring the network up to kind of scientific standards and use standard configurations across the network. So we kind of streamline things, and we kind of got the ball rolling a little bit, and it's starting to roll downhill. So we're kind of riding it right now as things really take off, and it's been a great deal.
Chris, we'll let you introduce yourself, and then we'll have a few more questions.
Yeah, I'm Kristy Brick. I'm with the Oklahoma Mesonet here in Norman at the University of Oklahoma. And I got it started with the Oklahoma Mesonet back in 1994 as a student employee. That was 1994 was when our network was commissioned operational. So we're just over 21 years now of being an operational Mesonet. But work had been going on for a good 5 to 10 years before 1994 in getting our Mesonet started. Dr. Ken Crawford, who was the area manager for the National Weather Service in Oklahoma, really had the vision to get a statewide mesoscale network operational, and he started working with Dr. Ron Elliott up at Oklahoma State University, the other big university in Oklahoma, to join forces to tackle both the weather aspect and the agricultural weather type aspect that a Mesonet could bring to decision makers across the state. And so there was a lot of work before I got here, but I was lucky to get a job as a student here in 1994 when things were just becoming operational. And I've been at the Mesonet since then, other than 1 year I did an internship at Weather Service headquarters in Silver Spring. But other than that, I've been here working in our operations center or in quality assurance. And then most recently, since 2001, I've been the manager of the Oklahoma Mesonet.
And when we talk about Mesonets, just for some people who may not be familiar with what we're talking about, what is the definition, or is there any set definition of a Mesonet? Is it, one in a general area, a certain amount of stations in a general area? What is the definition?
Well, it's typically the mesoscale weather phenomena that we're trying to depict in helping users. So those are the things, of course, that are like on a thunderstorm scale, severe wind gust, heavy rain events, those kinds of things, that are below the synoptic scale, but not quite on the level of tornadoes necessarily. They're much more localized. So just that in between the microscale and the synoptic scale is what we're trying to detect. And in Oklahoma, that's about the county scale for us. So our sites are about 30 kilometers apart, and that gives a good mesoscale, representation of the weather across the state.
Do you have a total count of the entire number that there are?
Yeah, so in our network, we have 120 stations. And it started out with 111 back in 94, and then we've slowly grown to 120, and that's kind of been our stable number. Another important aspect of the mesoscale aspect, and I'm sure Chip would agree, it's the temporal resolution of the data. So it's not just the synoptic hourly reporting, it's more 5-minute resolution, and Chip, I believe, maybe even 1 minute, I'm not sure. But so it's giving the data much more rapidly in the temporal as well as the spatial scale.
Which, of course, can be incredibly useful whenever you get, weather events moving in or out of your area and you're trying to forecast in real time. Chip, talk a little bit about the Kansas network and how many stations there are, and some of the advantages and uses that the Kansas Mesonet provides.
Yeah, well, the first stations got put in Kansas in the middle 80s, and they originally were put at the Kansas Research and Extension offices, which are local offices throughout the state that focus on agricultural research, and they wanted weather data at each location to go along with that research. So over the years, they kind of got tired of working with that, and every office is kind of doing their own thing. So the state climatologist took over those, and we've gradually grown since then. In '85, we had 13 stations originally. We have 13 core stations that have been there since '85. They're still there, and we've grown now. We're up to 51 stations as of right now, and we've got a lot more planned. And we're working on, that slow, gradual growth that we don't exceed what our resources can handle.
And you both mentioned agricultural uses. That seems to be a big thing that both Mesonets, just in Kansas and Oklahoma and regionally across the plains, seem to really play into. Is that a big usage from farmers and agricultural businesses?
Yeah, it's huge. There's private companies right now that are solely focusing on, micro scale field resolution data, just because it's so important to each individual producer, and they make big $1 million decisions based off what the weather is, whether it's to irrigate or not irrigate, or whether it's to plant due to soil temperatures. So that's really the main driver out here in the Central Plains, because that's where a lot of the United States agriculture is.
You mentioned soil temperatures. Chris, is that something that's usually included in all these sensors? What type of sensors are usually combined in a typical Mesonet station?
Yeah, so in our Mesonet, all of our sites have, of course, air temperature, relative humidity, wind speed, wind direction, wind gust, pressure, solar radiation, and then and rainfall. And then we have soil temperature at various depths and soil moisture at various depths. And the soils were originally put in, so back in 1994, the soil temperatures were part of the original network. Mainly for agricultural uses, planting decisions and things like that. In the mid-1990s, we then started adding soil moisture sensors, and again, that was primarily for agricultural uses. It's really interesting to look at the different depths of soil moisture that we have. We have it 5, 10, 25, and 60 centimeters. And you can see, certain rain events may only moisten the first few depths. And if the root zone of your crop is not in that depth, then that rain event didn't really benefit you. So you can monitor how deep the moisture is reaching. And then, of course, when the rain stops and the sun comes out, then it kind of flips, and now you've got where the top layers start evaporating first. And so anyway, we make a lot of tools for growers and producers using the soil moisture data, giving the amount of plant available water in the soil profile. And then, of course, as we know in meteorology, as the years have gone on, we've now learned that soil moisture is really an important part of land-atmosphere interactions. And so we've had research done here at the Mesonet that's shown that the path or the footprint of a storm that dropped a lot of rain and soil moisture ends up being the area that's the focus for convection for preceding days, because that's where you've got all the evapotranspiration going, you've got the moisture going back into the atmosphere. That's the the energy for the storms on future days. So there have been a number of studies that have looked at incorporating more soil moisture data into our forecast models, and they do see improvement in that. It's just a challenge of assimilating that data, and also then trying to use other parts of the state or other states that don't have the soil moisture observations and trying to estimate that to make the models make use of that soil moisture data.
That's an incredible kind of the future of meteorology almost, it seems, is getting more and more data thrown into these models, and more studies we've done and research is done to figure out why certain things happen. And I've seen some studies out of Alabama as well talking about different types of soil and soil moisture related to tornadogenesis. Has there been anything studied in terms of that?
I believe there has. I can't remember any details about it, but there are definitely, if you have an area of dry soils next to an area of moist soils, then you start getting anomalies and temperatures, across those two land surfaces that then, create different types of breezes and things like that that can lead to convergence or more shear and things like that. So yeah, I'm sure there are so many, and of course, here on the plains when we have severe thunderstorms, and you're like, well, why did a tornado form there and not, there, and all those things that we don't quite understand that are probably going into that microscale type features of the environment, whether it's the topography or the variations in temperature or moisture and things like that.
And Chip and Chris, I want to give both of you the opportunity to answer this, but with so many uses and so many people using these types of sensors, there's got to be some cost related to it, to set them all up in the first place. Where did that money come from? Back in the 80s and 94, where did all the funding come from for systems like this?
With our individual offices, I think it was kind of an office by office surplus that they put out these stations with, and they didn't have the same equipment at each station, and there was no ever thought at that time to make a network on the mesoscale like we're trying to do now in Kansas. So it kind of develops as it goes, and the funding changes with time, obviously, as different funding agencies put out money at different times, and it's really kind of all reflected upon how really the economy is. Right now we're lucky enough to have a lot of people, especially individuals or businesses, willing to put forward money because they realize how valuable this data is, and they would like to contribute that data to not only their applications but also the science in general. So that's kind of the driving factor right now. And Chris would probably mention this, but right now a large majority, at least of our funding, is from the National Mesonet program, and that's really been a savior for our program and given us a chance.
Chris, is that a research thing, or is that a government thing, or?
It is. It's a government thing, and it started maybe 4 or 5 years ago. It's slowly been growing, and there have been efforts for probably 15 years to try to develop a national mesonet, and it's very difficult with various states involved, different government agencies involved. And there's just so many, it's just an enormous task. And our previous director, Ken Crawford, spent a lot of, my light just turned out, spent a lot of his years trying to build a national mesonet. And see if I can get my light to turn back on. There it goes.
Keeping you there after hours?
My CO2 sensor must have gone off or something. So he spent a lot of time trying to work with NOAA to do that, and what has really been successful is the private sector Earth networks that has a lot of kind of school stations across the United States, along with some other private companies that have worked with federal funding agencies to try to develop a national mesonet. And it has become an important source of funding. It doesn't pay for but just a fraction of our cost, but at least it is for the first time some federal dollars that are coming to help. Chip and I had lunch a couple of weeks ago, and we could talk nonstop just about funding challenges, and that's pretty much the typical, anytime people that work at Mesonets get together, that's all we talk about, because it is really a challenge to get stable funding. It's very common for states to get initial dollars to build a Mesonet, and then that's it. And then it is a struggle to keep the things operating. So, we have 120 sites we're trying to keep operating every 5 minutes around the clock, keep the sensors calibrated, keep the radios transmitting, keep the batteries charged, on and on and on. It is a massive operation, and honestly, putting in, are you still there?
Okay. Yeah, we got you.
Okay. Putting in the infrastructure, putting in the network is easy compared to keeping it maintained. because that's what's so challenging year after year. And so we are really lucky in Oklahoma in that we got state dollars from the very beginning, and we have recurring state funding from our legislature. And I believe we're the only state in that position, and that helps us a lot. That funds about 2/3 of our operations. The other third we have to raise through grants and contracts every year to keep the network going.
I can totally understand that because, you know, we at WCYB we run a weather bug network, and you know it has many sensors that are old or outdated and need some updating and just upkeep, and wires get unplugged, and a bunch of stuff can go wrong. Just to take it offline to get it back online can be a struggle sometimes. But
yeah, I mean the simple fact is every electronic drifts and will eventually you know, hit its end of life. And so there's a constant need for maintenance and new equipment.
Chip, you have to add?
Yeah, and you know we've also I failed to mention this at the beginning, but you know we do get the Kansas or the National Mesonet funding, but Kansas Research and Extension has really been grateful too, and they provide a lot of funding for us each year too. It's not nearly the magnitude of what we could possibly get from other networks sometimes, but it's really beneficial and helps us keep going, especially when times are tough. And it's also a constant source that we can always rely on. Where the National Mesonet, we live a little bit from year to year, maybe every 2 years, every 3 years, and it's really been a nice steady source.
How many guys or how many people do you have working for each Mesonet? I mean, I know you have to go around and make sure everything's functioning correctly and stuff like that. What does the employee number look like, if you will?
I'll start, but go from one extreme to the other. We have 4 people that work for us. We have I'm the manager. We have a developer, which we're hiring for right now, and we also have a full-time technician, and we have a part-time technician. We have an assistant climatologist. So we have 4 people, and we have several students that work with us from time to time. So the technician is on the road a lot more than he'd prefer, either through routine maintenance or for visits that we need to do on a day-to-day basis. But it's hard to make it work with 4 people.
Yeah, and we have it a little bit better off. We have 4 technicians. 3 of them each have 1/3 of the state, so each of those 3 technicians takes care of about 40 stations, plus about 20 bases, plus about 15 repeater sites. So they've got their hands full with a whole lot of things that can go wrong with our bases, repeaters, or our stations. And then we have a 4th technician that all he does is goes to all 120 sites 3 to 4 times a year maintaining the vegetation. So he is on the road constantly all week. And then that's our technician side. We do have a calibration lab that we have a calibration manager and a calibration technician who calibrate all of our sensors. And then another big group that we have is our software development team, because we have over the years started running our own fire danger model, our own ag models, things that predict things like cattle comfort and first hollow stem and winter wheat and watermelon anthracnose and all kinds of things like that. We have dozens of models we run that have to be updated, of course. And then we have an iPhone app, an Android app, an iPad app for our technicians. And if you've done any of those things, you know that those are almost a full-time job just to keep, you know, an Android app or an iPhone app working and updating with new operating systems and with new phones and things like that. So we have a good group of software developers also. And then lastly, which we have done since the beginning and is so key to our partnerships around the state, is we have a great group of outreach program managers, one that focuses just on public safety officials in the state. So James Hawker trains, we've had about 1,000 emergency managers go through our training, and they come in and then they have to be recertified every 18 months through us. to use our tools, our visualization tools, and learn how to use our Mesonet data for decision making in their communities. And then we have J.D. Carlson at OSU, who does the same thing, but for fire managers and firefighters. And we've trained over 1,000 fire managers and firefighters through that program because, using the local mesoscale temperature, wind, relative humidity, solar radiation, we can predict, how high the flames are going to be, what the likelihood of ignition is going to be, how fast a fire will spread, all those types of things. So he focuses on those groups. Then we have Andrea Melvin, who leads our K through 12 education outreach, working with schools across the state and putting on summer camps and things like that. And then lastly, Al Sutherland, who leads our ag outreach, who's out training growers and producers and at ag shows and county educator workshops and things like that on how to get the ag community using the data. So we rely on all those users to help us get the stable funding each year.
I want to circle back to two things you said. First one being the fires and the wildfires and how the Mesonet plays into that. Even just tonight, we've seen a few wildfires across Oklahoma. Is it something that's used, in terms of soil moisture and stuff like that to figure out areas that are more at risk for red flag warnings and high fire dangers?
Yes. So we have our own fire danger model that we developed with Missoula back a number of years ago, about 10 years ago, I believe. And so it's tweaked for Oklahoma specifically, but those key indices, burning index, which predicts the flame height, energy release, spread component, and ignition component. Those are kind of the 4 key things that we're able to give very detailed estimates of in every county across the state to help firefighters know exactly where the fire potential is the greatest. And then the other group we work with, and this is the same in Kansas, we have a ton of prescribed burners. So people out setting fires because it's an important part of the ag cycle in Oklahoma. And so they use the data to plan those prescribed burns so that they don't turn into wildfires and things like that. So it's a two, we're helping people fight the fires and we're helping people set the fires. And the weather is just, it drives it all. The only external thing we ingest is the satellite relative greenness data. That's they take a picture, satellites do once a week to show how green the vegetation is, and that feeds into the fire danger model with all the current weather data to give those really precise fire conditions.
Gotcha. And I also want to hit on the apps and the websites. Do you have numbers on how many people frequent those websites?
Yeah, I should have pulled it for you. I think we've had around 60,000 downloads of our iPhone app and around 30,000 of our Android app. And so whenever we got into the app business, it was a big commitment because it took about a year each to develop those apps. It's a lot of work. And our apps, we wanted to provide some forecast data, we wanted to provide some mediograms, we wanted to provide some advisory information. So it really took a lot of work, and especially on the Android side, since there were so many different sizes of devices. So it took a while to develop those, and we're seeing, I think, without a doubt, it was the right move for us, because when you have tens of thousands of people using them a day, that's a decent section of your users that are getting the data just from the apps. Now on the website, our Google Analytics show closer to about 60,000 unique users. So we're getting to the point where it's probably about half and half. Half are using the web, half are using the apps.
And Chip, I can't let you go without referencing your profile picture, because when I mentioned fire, I should have just circled right back to you immediately, since there's a fire burning in the back of your profile picture. First off, tell us a little bit about what that's about, and how the Kansas Mesonet can play into stuff like that too.
Yeah, I got into fire when I went to grad school in South Dakota. There was a incident meteorologist that works with the state of South Dakota, and he was kind of my mentor for a while. And I worked with him on several incidents, and kind of got into the same thing myself. Got red carded, and was a trainee under him. And I kind of took that into Kansas, and I work with the Kansas Forest Service. Since I'm a state agency, I can work with them very easily. And I work with them on different things they do, whether it's prescribed burning or they do a mitigation project every year. And they also make me eligible to either go out on actual wildfires as a firefighter or an IMET. So from there, we've really been working with the stations itself. When we do a prescribed burn, I'll take a station that we have, and the plan is, we haven't done this yet, but the plan is to take that out. We have a portable station and locate it next to a prescribed burn to watch how the fire behaves with the different meteorological conditions in Kansas. And with prescribed burning is really critical here. I'm doing some work with the Kansas Fire Marshal, using actual wildfire data and comparing that to station observations, whether it's the Mesonet, ASOS, or RAWS stations, which Kansas has 4. And those are really sparsely spread out, especially across eastern Kansas, where they do a majority of the burning in the Flint Hills. So we're looking to really enhance the network in those areas, because a lot of times we're finding the red flag warning criteria isn't being met, so they're not issuing red flag warnings or other grassland fire danger index, etc., to warn these fire managers of high fire danger. And a lot of times the actual observations that are responsible for a fire getting away aren't being met in these criteria. So what we're hoping to look at in the future is look at how the weather really influences these prescribed burns in the Flint Hills, because it's such a drastic and changing terrain, and then see with these enhanced measurements if we can influence the criteria or change the criteria to more properly represent bad burning times, especially in Kansas.
Are there a lot of students that work with you from the local universities to use a lot of the Mesonet data, to do their research studies?
At K-State, we get quite a bit. We get a lot. We average probably about 30 to 40 requests on a month, and that's just the ones we document. We have a lot of undocumented requests, and that's one thing we've been working on improving. But there'll be students that request 30 years climate data that's not even the Mesonet, to Mesonet observations for a day, high resolution 1 minute data, that kind of thing. So we have a really wide range of requests from all these students, and there are large. Outside of Kansas State University, we don't have quite as much, and mainly that's because we really haven't been involved with different universities a whole lot. Like KU has a meteorology program, and we've worked a little bit with them, but not as much as we could, and we really hope to build and enhance those relationships in the future.
And Chris, I assume the same it goes for you, considering you've mentioned research studies that have been done using the Mesonet data.
Yeah, and so not only having student employees, like Chip mentioned, they have some student employees. We rely on a lot of student employees. Also, it's a great, great on-the-job training for them to do an operational task while they're a student, and then we also have work with senior capstones, graduate research assistants, things like that, who are doing their topic on Mesonet data. So we have quite a good scientific bibliography of people that have used the data over the years, and that helps prove the case of the scientific use of the data also.
And that's something we haven't been very good at in the past, is documenting when people use this data and when they use it for publications and that kind of thing. We really need to start logging those things, and you can't really backlog it because a lot of the students have moved on and it's hard to track them. But in the future, we're really working on improving that, and we're also looking to outreach with different proposals and things to get graduate students that'll use solely our data, and I think that will really enhance our network in the future.
Yeah, and another important staff member we have is Brad Ilston, who leads our research, and so he kind of not only does research to help our network, but he monitors the journals and tries to keep pace on who all is using the data, working with researchers, helping them get access to the data. It's really important for researchers to include us in their grants. Most of the time, though, they don't. And they come to us after the grant's already been funded, and they say, now we need all your data. And so we still try to work with them. We say, okay, we will, but we promise to include us in your next proposal, because we really rely on additional grants and contracts to keep our network operational.
Understandable for sure. Speaking about the future, I think Scotty has a viewer question that kind of references a little bit of the future.
Yeah, we have a viewer named Craig, lives actually in Canada, and his question was, he's in the meteorology program, and saying how useful this would be for Canada. What is the expansion like looking for you guys? Do you see this? I know, Chris, you referred to it a little bit earlier as it being kind of hard to get everyone in a national database, but what do you think the outlook looks like for other states or other countries to adopt something like this into their program?
Did you say he was from Canada?
Yeah, he's from Canada.
Well, actually, for about 15 years, we've had a partnership with Quebec. So if he's in that province, if he goes to mesonetquebec.org, we've designed their website, helped them with their ingest and their quality assurance, and they have quite an impressive Mesonet in Quebec, and they are trying to expand to other places in Canada also. So yeah, it's, I think with time and with technology, everyone's learning that we can do things more efficient, more cost effectively if we have better data. And it takes time for people to change, their practices, especially in the ag community. Maybe if they've been doing things the same way for their whole life, and now someone is trying to tell them that they can use weather data to help make better decisions. It's a slow process. But with time, everywhere from the energy sector, we had a PhD student, Asha Tribble, back probably almost 10 years ago now, who worked with the Oklahoma electric co-ops, and it was just amazing how much they could save by deciding not to turn on a generator if a cold front was coming through, or those are big, expensive decisions that making use of mesoscale data can really help. And I think as that message continues across more and more sectors, whether it be electric, farming, public safety, there will be a growth of Mesonets. And in the public safety arena, it's kind of hard to put a price on it. If you save a life, and it's hard to know, did your data really save the life? But if you just think about, if a storm is approaching your community, and you don't know, is that packing 40-mile-an-hour winds or 80-mile-an-hour winds? You're going to make a very different decision about things. Maybe you're going to cancel your high school football game, or maybe you're going to go out and try to pre-position areas that might flood, to close highways, and all those things. As you get more and more experienced in what you can do with better, mesoscale data, I think they'll continue to grow and get support.
You bring up something we've talked about several times on this show, and that's outdoor events in relation to severe weather. You guys at OU and K-State, with football being a big sport for both of your schools, with storms rolling in and stuff, do the football officials or the officials at the stadiums use that information that, to your knowledge, let's say OU is going to kick off at 3:30, but Mesonet just around the stadium at 3 o'clock showing a front moving through with some severe storms. Do they utilize that any at all, to your knowledge?
I have unique insight to that because our director at the Climate Survey is also the university meteorologist, and he is on task for every single football game at OU as well as all the other activities. And so he has us turn on the 1-minute data from our Norman Mesonet site. He is monitoring it constantly and making those decisions along with lightning data, and other types of data. And so, I don't know how widespread it is, but he is one of the first few university-type meteorologists that is really embedding meteorologists into the big venue-type events.
Yeah, at K-State, we're looking to get the university storm ready because they're not even storm ready yet, and that would be the resource on campus for that. But other than that, we really don't they're not utilizing our data, and that's kind of we're responsible for that too because we just haven't been able to push it there. But there's a lot of future growth that needs to occur there, and examples like Oklahoma, I think are really good points to bring up to the decision makers for either the sports or the university to show just how useful this information can be and how critical it is, especially at times with large groups of people on campus and that kind of thing.
Right offhand, as we're talking about expanding into states and countries, how many states do you guys know of that utilize a statewide program like this?
Go ahead, Chris, if you'd like.
Well, luckily I've gotten to know Chip well, so I have a good sense of our neighboring state, and also I talked with the Missouri network a few weeks ago. It's hard to really know, and New York is one of the newest states that are developing statewide networks. They got Superstorm Sandy funds, and they're trying to deploy a network. So it's hard to really keep track of the status of each state's network. I know Kentucky has a good network. I know North Carolina, Dr. Boyle's there at, I believe it's, he's got the North Carolina, NC State, the North Carolina Environment and Climate Observing Network. The network there, I don't know if you guys are, I would guess, living in that area, you guys are pretty familiar with that. So it's kind of I think everyone's kind of year to year on a different status with their network, just because of funding and with the expansion and things like that. I know that I don't believe like Arkansas has a network, but I do know that West Texas has a really good network, so part of that state has a network.
A lot of the Central Plains states have good agricultural networks, which I guess you can call a Mesonet. They may not call it a Mesonet. I know High Plains Regional Climate Center in Nebraska runs UNL Nebraska, or UNL Lincoln. They run a large network. I think it's about 80 stations, including in Nebraska and Wyoming. South Dakota has a fairly good network as well, with their state climate office, and North Dakota has another large one too, who I've worked with a lot here recently in communication of just different things that we're working on. So there are a lot of states. I think I would venture to say that most states probably have a network, but what it all consists of and how large is it and what they call it and how public the data is varies greatly. But I would venture to say that probably a university at each state has some network of weather stations somewhere. Well,
what do you two believe the future of the Mesonet is? Loaded question, I know, perhaps.
Well, the future is dependent on funding. Next question. No, I think the future is promising. There's a lot of people, as Chris said, there's a lot more uses coming out of the data that people never thought of before. We just worked on a homicide in the last month or two of just what happened to the body and that kind of thing. But just there's a lot of uses for it that people don't think of. So as those uses keep expanding, I think our value is going to increase. And I think, we have goals, like our goal, or long-term goal, is to get a station in every county. And after that, then I guess work on micronets. I mean, those kind of gross are what people think of. They think of how many stations do you have and where are they located. Other than that, people they can't connect the dots very easily on what the growth in the future is. Other applications are different web development, different applications of the data that people can access quick and easy. So a lot more tools, especially for us. You know, we're the redheaded stepchild of Oklahoma, is what a lot of people call us, because they know of Oklahoma. They know of all the tools available, and they come to like our webpage and they expect all those tools. And it's like, well, so our future is to be like Oklahoma.
Yeah, and I hope our future is, to continue bringing all the states, together, and because that's where you get really the value of the mesoscale data. If the stuff doesn't stop at the state borders, so we want Kansas to keep being successful and Texas to keep being successful, and we have a lot of just cooperation. I mean, I just emailed Chip the other day about his experiences using cell phone technology, because that's not something we use a lot in Oklahoma yet, but he has a lot of experience with that, and so we just hope that someday this will be nationwide. Every state will have it, because that's when you will really see benefits. I mean, I think there'll be a quantum leap in applications you can make once we start getting more and more states with Mesonets in them that are stable.
Well, there's an interesting. There's an interesting thing that I think I was at the NWA conference a couple weeks ago that people were talking about, is that when they look at model initialization, they pull in the observations, obviously, for the model initialization. Well, if they pull in all the Oklahoma Mesonet obs, it starts to replicate problems in the physics downstream and nearby, because you have such a high resolution, and then next to a coarser resolution, and it creates issues with the forecast and the resulting output in the model. So those kind of things, I think, will really push for other states, or at least other people, to get involved in other states to expand networks and to make them a bigger thing, to kind of go towards that national Mesonet idea. And down the road, probably 50 years, we will be at that point. But it's just a long time to build up to that.
Now, I know we're still trying to expand and get a lot more places into it, but what's sort of the next best thing that we can go to as the public, or in the meteorology area, like where we're trying to see something like Mesonet, but we don't have it in our state? What's the next best level of information resources we can go to?
Well, I know there was mention of the Earth networks, or not Earth networks, but WeatherBug, and all those independent, small, local backyard stations that you can use. And there's a lot of them out there. A lot of people have stations in their backyard that provide that data for free. The quality is obviously, as mentioned earlier, questionable at times, but that's probably a close second best.
Yeah, and I would say, in addition to what Chip said, CocoRa's network, that we will never be able to have Mesonet towers at the density that a CocoRa's network could be. And I'm guessing you and your viewers have heard of CocoRa's before, Community Collaborative Rain and Hail study. And, we have, I would say, maybe 20 CocoRa's observers in Norman and one Mesonet site, and so getting that little microscale data that's just volunteer from dedicated users that are submitting their observations, and they're submitting their hail reports, and they're submitting their, extreme, because I'm a CocoRa's observer. I submit my ob every morning, and so is Chip, every morning at 7 a.m. But, if we get 10 inches of rain in the middle of the day, I can also submit that during the day. And that is something that would be great to continue to expand. I know that in Oklahoma, one of our biggest challenges is with winter precipitation, and I think CocoRa's is the answer for those types of observations, because having a whole bunch of snow observations is way more important than just one automated station in a county, because like rainfall, snow is highly variable, and that's something that is low cost, that can get the community involved and get some really valuable data across the state.
I wanted to ask you too, as we're coming close to 9 o'clock and wrapping everything up, What is the coolest thing that both the Oklahoma and Kansas Mesonets have observed?
Okay, I'll start. Let's see. The coolest thing. Oh, there's two. The first was we had an F5 tornado move about 100 yards north of our El Reno site. So it didn't take down the site, but we recorded 151 miles an hour, and that set the all-time state record highest wind gust ever recorded in Oklahoma. And that was just really exciting. And luckily there wasn't a lot of debris around. So we had that, and one other quick thing, if you'll let me do two, was in 2011, one of our sites dropped down to minus 31 Fahrenheit, coldest temperature ever recorded in state history. We actually we'd only calibrated our sensors down to minus 30 because we didn't think anything colder than that could ever happen in Oklahoma, but we went out and retrieved the sensors the very next day, brought them into our lab, calibrated them down to minus 40, and that became the official coldest temperature ever recorded in Oklahoma. The same year that Oklahoma had the hottest summer of any state in history, that same year of 2011. So,
wow. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that El Reno tornado, the pressure graph on that has been used in a few research studies.
Yeah, we got great data from that.
Chip, how about the Kansas Mesonet? What's the coolest thing it's observed?
Well, it's not really a good thing, but when a temperature, it took me a while to figure out what happened, but when the temperature went from about 70 degrees to negative 40, and the RH went from about 100% to like negative 60 or 80 or something like that, ridiculous, and it was a result of a lightning strike nearby. And it fried the sensor. Everything else still worked just fine, didn't hurt the data logger or anything, but just the potential in the air, the gradient just was too much for it, I suppose. And that's a really good example too of just how hard it is to maintain this equipment out there, and to know what's a valid measurement, what's not a valid measurement, and are you actually having sensor issues, or are you not? And I tweet about it a lot too. Is another issue that we have that's not cool but really annoying, is that rodents will chew through the wires all the time, and so we'll get not a number of values for temperature when it was working fine yesterday, and we were just at the site yesterday. So those kind of things are really frustrating, but they happen, and they're neat. I mean, there's obviously some sort of animal that's doing that. What kind of animal? You could get into a whole research project on its own.
Right, very cool. We want to give you both an opportunity to plug your social accounts. Do you, Kit or Scotty, have any final questions?
I'm good.
Alrighty, well, we'll let Chip plug his social account first and how people can get in touch with you, and then Chris will follow up with you.
Well, Twitter's the easiest. It's just my @WX_Chip. And then our webpage is obviously the most important. And that's mesonet.ksu.edu. And it'll take you to a main page. If you want my email, it's on there. You can also email me at christopherredmond.com. Oh man, that's not my email. I wish. christopherredmond@ksu.edu. I should look up that URL. And you can also get that information off our webpage if you go to information. So,
Chris?
Yeah, and ours is our website's mesonet.org, and then we have a Facebook account. You can search for Oklahoma Mesonet, and our Twitter is OK Mesonet.
Alrighty, and I assume the door is always open for anyone who wants to include you guys on a research grant or anything like that.
Yes.
Alrighty, Scotty, I'll give it to you.
All right, guys, thank you so much for coming on tonight, and very interesting, and hopefully we can see that expansion out to other states, and would love to see something like that in North Carolina, a big network. So, again, thanks so much. And next week we're going to be talking about the CASA radars. I know they were a little bit busy this afternoon in Dallas, so we're going to have representatives on next week to kind of talk about that and how it would benefit the North Carolina area, especially the Charlotte to Greensboro areas. So that's what's on next week, and then after that we're going to take a break for Thanksgiving before we talk about the South Carolina flood the first Wednesday of December. It's hard to believe that we're closing in on that. 2 years almost, guys, that we've been doing this, Ricky. So I think that's the same anniversary, our second year anniversary. So kind of a busy night, December the 2nd.
We're going to have to make cupcakes or something.
I know. We'll have to get a cake like. Did you see James Spann's cake yesterday?
Yeah, nothing ever tops James Spann cake, though. That dude gets the best cakes in the world. He had cake the time I visited him, and he's like, "Here, you want some cake? I got this today from the school."
All the time he's having cake, but this one was really cool. It's like it's a tornado and a hurricane, and I can't remember what the third one was. The blizzard of '93. So, yeah, pretty cool. So that's what's coming on the next few weeks here on the Carolinas Weather Group. Ricky will have the podcast up in a few days or so, and you'll be able to download that from your favorite app store. So with that, hope you all have a great evening. Enjoy the weather, and stay warm this weekend if you're in the Carolinas, because it's going to get a little chilly. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week.
Adios, amigos.